The truth is, I don't think we have a ton of great examples of what real confidence looks like because it actually isn't very flashy. It tends to kind of fall into the background. When I'm around a confident person, I can attribute a lot to that person. They must feel amazing. You know what actually is going on for them? They're not thinking about their feelings at all. They're too busy focusing on what's in front of them. If people remove the expectation around getting the rewards, having the performance, and they set on themselves the expectation of the work, they will make radical progress. It's funny, you talk to someone who's actually confident in a certain skill set, and they kind of go, oh, you want this feeling? Show me with your life. Show me with your reps. As humans, we prefer the path of least resistance. We crave convenience, the payoff without the price. But when our lives revolve around comfort, it doesn't deliver. Living in perpetual comfort leaves us weak and asleep. This podcast is an invitation to flip that script, to choose the unlikely path, to get the life you really want through voluntary discomfort. This is Strong and Awake. I'm Dane Sanders.
Before I started MWOD, I had to get on my roof at my home to fix a tile, and I got stuck on my roof, and I couldn't get down because I was afraid of falling off my roof, but my wife came out and I got down. But ever since then, I realized I'm afraid of heights now. I'm afraid of falling. So fast forward now, I work along our community fire department, and I take photos and videos for them as part of my day job. I had climbed up to the very top of the 3 or 4 story tower, and I had that feeling inside of me. I was like, ugh, I have a problem with heights. And one of the firefighters asked me to say, Craig, when you're done working, you want to climb the aerial ladder. And I was thinking, no, I don't want to climb that ladder.
Dane, before we get into Craig's story and dig into a little bit of that, you mentioned something as we were talking before we hit record about confidence. And I know that the show is titled, Building Confidence, but not all confidence is created equal, or maybe people have different definitions of confidence. And I think you hold a really interesting and potentially edgy or controversial view on this. And I'd love to set the stage with that.
Yeah, I think a helpful metaphor is the distinction between gold and fool's gold. There's kind of a fool's confidence and an actual confidence. And when you see actual confidence, it's obvious. Like here's what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like bravado. It doesn't look like ego. In fact, the most confident people often can be the quietest people in the room because they understand what it takes to be in a position of strength and the work and how fragile it can be. They're not interested in talking about what they do. They're just interested in doing the thing. There's some really helpful observations I even read this week from the growth equation folks. They were talking specifically about the difference between the running influencer and the person who's just out running. And the person who's so interested in promoting what they're about and what they're doing probably don't have time to do the work to be in a position of strength and real confidence, the authentic kind that they're craving. And it's more like we're gesturing or we're acting as though we're confident as opposed to being confident. This is why fool's gold and gold is a helpful kind of visual in our minds. The truth is, I don't think we have a ton of great examples of what real confidence looks like because it actually isn't very flashy. It tends to kind of fall into the background. I think there's a book written a million years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. And now millionaire, we're like, what's that? So it'd have to be a trillionaire now next door or something. But it was this remarkable study. This is the short form version of it, of actual millionaires, not people who drive fancy cars and pretend as though they're millionaires, are putting themselves in, they're probably leveraged, way out of scope. But the people who actually, where it started, the people who did the study, they brought all these people to this fancy penthouse where they thought that's what they needed to have a status standard. They're going to bring people in. And the actual millionaires they invited into the door, multimillionaires, they showed up in like old clothes, driving old cars. And they went up to the open bar and got like a Budweiser. And like the reason they were so wealthy is because they were so frugal. They weren't flashy. They were confident. They were also, by the way, side note, resilient. They were also the kinds of people that aren't surprised when they come up against something that's going to press their confidence, press their capacity and their strength. In fact, they see that as normal. That's the world that confident people live in. Is true confidence is they recognize what it takes to be great. They don't just cognitively recognize it. They recognize it in their actions through their bodies. So I think it's a great setup for today's conversation around Craig and his experience on the, overcoming things like fear of heights, to have a sense of confidence in that. We've talked about my singing story at the talent show and what it takes to be in a position of confidence in a room with a microphone when you're not famous for having a natural voice, and you have to have done work in advance in order to have a moment. And that work in advance, I think, is the part that in this world that we live in, where all we're seeing is the performance, we're not seeing the practice that leads to the performance. It's just so tempting to think that somehow the performance, there's a shortcut to it. And there actually is, if we're talking about confidence in particular, as a performance, that people are showing up confidently in an authentic way, the real kind. There was work that was done in advance of that. And it's sobering work. It's just kind of like, there's nothing sexy about it. Yet that's exactly what is required to get the real confidence that I think people are craving.
Yeah, I think people see that end and they think that, this final stage, this performance, the build up to that is just as sexy and exciting and flashy and easy in appearance. And that's just not the case. We know that.
But also one more piece in that. The other thing that I think people fall prey to is they think that it's just innate. It's just you either are confident or you're not confident. Steph Curry's just Steph Curry and his confidence with shooting a basket. And it's just not true. It gets confusing, right? Because then he goes and does other things like golf or whatever. You're like, and he's good at golf too. And he's good at whatever too. And he's good at whatever too. And it's like, well, he is a confident man, but I promise when the stuff we're seeing, even when he's golfing, even when he's like, whatever he's competing at, there's a famous story of Kobe Bryant where I think it was golf actually, where he was like, I'm going to go play golf. And he was like, well, I'm not just going to play golf. He like disappeared for a month and probably found the best ever at whatever, like coach, trainer, pro, whatever, hit away, and then just showed up and, oh, wow, he's decent at that too. What can he do? And I think the contrast to that is the folks that we bump into all the time in our world who you talk to them and they're almost like in a trance, like, gosh, I wish I was confident. I don't know how to be confident. What do I need to be confident? And what they don't realize is they're actually practicing like the opposite of confident, insecure. And they're wondering, if I keep practicing insecurity and keep saying I'm insecure, that somehow I'll become confident. And neither are resourceful. Like asserting confidence isn't resourceful. Asserting over and over again that you don't know why. And none of those things, none of those stories we tell ourselves over and over again are actually the kinds of actions that yield confidence. But there are actions that do yield confidence, and it's so much more accessible than people realize.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think really when it comes down to it, people are letting themselves off the hook by either saying that's unattainable.
Yep.
Like, or it's just for that person, or I'll never become that. It's this, oh, sweet, I don't have to worry about that or even stress that it's possible because like it's so much easier if it's just not. And so we also have these other categories of like this lack of confidence that like the story beneath the surface is oftentimes like this fear of failure, fear of discomfort. We talk about that a lot here. Fear of like being out of control of something, the unknown. Can you think of any other things that might hold people back? I'm sure anyone listening to this, whether it's heights or pursuing that new job or changing some aspect of your life can articulate this, but do you have like other things that are actually like below the surface, or if we zoom out, what's really going on here with confidence?
In my experience, the number one reason why people don't make progress with things like confidence is because they are experiencing the benefits of being a victim. And what I mean by that is the upside of being a victim is you're not responsible. And when you're not responsible, the idea that it's somehow on me to go and figure out how to get confidence or fill in the blank, anything that seems out of reach that you've already decided is either a reflection of fate, you already have it or you don't, or I'm just not good enough, or like, God, it's just so hard, or I'm just wired this way, or like whatever it is, there's a huge upside. And what's, it's all, we've talked about this in past shows. What's always challenging about when you talk about victims is there are legitimate victims out there. So I'm not saying being a victim is bad or that somehow like I'm minimizing that, some people they have disadvantages compared to other people. Even the example I said earlier about like a Steph Curry or Kobe Bryant, like those are remarkable athletes that probably have ridiculous talent, like wired in, but that was still insufficient for them to become who they are. They had to work that talent in particular directions. And they also had significant disadvantages in the midst of it. If you read all the reports on Steph Curry before he hit the league, everything said too short, not strong enough, will get beat up, relies too much on his shooting, injury prone, and all these dynamics that were opportunities in his view to orient his life in such a way that he could gain confidence in the very categories that everyone said were deficits. And that's what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is taking pause internally and realizing that this is all humans do this. All humans gain a benefit from having victim status, whether it's kind of a dramatic victimization situation, which I'm sorry if that's you. Yeah, I've mentioned in the show before, like my dad died when I was 3. I was a victim to that. It sucks, man. But I could live under that for my whole life. Or I could go, okay, so what if that wasn't the end of the story? What if there was more to the story? What if actually that's just my initial kind of plot point A on the map state, but I'm actually interested in developing confidence at being a dad? How does a guy who didn't have a dad, whose dad didn't have a dad, because my dad died when my dad was 3, on top of my dad dying when I was 3, how do I become a dad? Well, I'm actually I'm a really good dad, actually. And it didn't come naturally at all. It was a whole bunch of reps. and this idea, even this vision of like, I actually think I could be a dad that's strong and confident and can show up for my kids in a way that is meaningful. And I'm not destined, or despite my history. In fact, because of my history, my history actually gave me a clear path on how can I go get confident? Well, go in the direction of the ways that I feel most insecure. That's the easiest path forward to find confidence.
And one of the firefighters asked me to say, Craig, when you're done working, you want to climb the aerial ladder. And I was thinking, no, I don't want to climb that ladder. I consider myself a man of discomfort, and it makes me really uncomfortable to do this. So I came back to that person and I said, strap me in. And I climbed the ladder. I think I overcame a lot of my fear of heights in that moment. I do hard things now. I do things that I don't want to do. And it was through my future round and simple practices like cold immersion, not wanting to get in, that you realize those little feelings of not wanting to do something. And then you push through it and come out on the other side and you're just like, oh, I'm so glad I did that.
So Craig, he's terrified of getting up on a ladder or getting up on a roof. So guess what his recipe is in order to become confident at a tall height? You practice. And it is unbelievably uncomfortable. And I get why people don't do it. It's why we say a minimum of discomfort, it's probably not for you. But for those who do, they become confident with everyday little things. They come up against an obstacle they've never experienced before, and they're like, well, I've come up against obstacles that I've never been able to overcome before in other categories. Why couldn't I do that here? And they take the same pattern and they apply it. And in time, they're as surprised and grateful as anybody. And they're humbled because they realize where they came from. But there's a sense of authentic confidence that comes as a result.
Yeah, he didn't. It's not like Craig acted because all of a sudden he had this mindset shift and now all fear was gone.
That's
and
right.
he ascended the ladder.
That's
no,
right.
It's like his confidence came with like, yes, the fear was still there, and he acted like still in the presence of that fear.
That's right.
And I think that's one of the biggest differences is, we can stay where we are and like justify and rationalize kind of the status quo. Like, no, it's dangerous. It's real. Like the danger is real. The risk is real. Therefore, like I have confidence in my decision to stay where I'm at. Like it's like this like false kind of cheap confidence, this fool's gold.
Yeah.
When really what's on the other side of this, even if you do fail, even if you step out, there's a new story to live into that people often just are content to live without discovering. So if we have these kind of, obviously we've talked about some of the limiting beliefs, these flawed solutions, you were just hinting at action, moving, getting reps. Let's talk about that. Why is it different for those that actually step in the midst of fear, in the midst of all of these things that all of us are navigating, yet they take action and they can actually start to build and develop this confidence?
Yeah. I mean, some of what I think you're asking is what is the connection or correlation of courage to confidence? And I think it's a really worthy question. Ryan Holiday's pointed out that courage is a cardinal virtue. It's a virtue. It's a hinge virtue, is what he means. And meaning, all the other virtues. Let's say confidence is a virtue. It hinges on our willingness to be courageous with our bodies, with our minds, in conversation, to do the thing that we don't want to do sometimes, maybe more often than not. And again, I think we can be deceived into believing that if we understand, even if someone listened to every podcast we ever gave and they read every document, every book, every article, every whatever about this voluntary discomfort practice modality that MWOD proposes and prescribes, read all the testimonials of all the success stories of people who've gone through, hundreds of people, and the transformation they've gone through as a result. They don't know anything until they put their body into the process themselves. I know this because I have good friends who I love who think they understand what MWOD is. And I have also another group of friends who were like that first group of friends who made fun of me for years, thought they understood what I was doing. I had a kind of a caricature of who we are. And they actually joined. They signed up. And then, a round in, 2 rounds in, 3 rounds in, of course, things shift for them. They get in great shape and they start getting less angry. They show up differently at work. They prepare for their days like a professional. They end their days in anticipation that if they don't get their rest and their hydration ready for the next day, and they're not even doing all this to optimize their life. They're actually doing this because they want to learn how to relate with the world as the world is, where it's rugged, and they're getting strong and awake for love's sake in the midst of that rugged world. And as they have those reps, those experiences, their body following through on these things that we talk about so often, they become different sorts of people. They actually become confident in not only what we talk about, like they've lived it, they have experiential knowledge, not just kind of theoretical knowledge, but they have evidence to show for it. Like maybe they have a history of getting really triggered with their spouse or their kids, or we have the legend that is Mark Brewer, who's in our community working in a really tough environment as a teacher, where there's like kids, low socioeconomic kids, like on the totem pole of that, are getting in these really like young girls getting in fist fights on campus that he's having to break up, or people being really unreasonable. And he's built a whole practice, a life practice around not reacting. And talk about somebody who has confidence, right? Because the guy can walk into it seemingly almost any scene, and you want him in charge because he has a high capacity to be authoritative when he needs to, but he rarely needs to do that. because just his presence has a gravitas, a set of reps that people, they submit to. And when they don't, he has the capacity to take over a situation as is needed. And again, when I think of confidence, I don't know if I have a better picture in my mind than something like that. But if you meet Mark Brewer at a social event, he's not going to jump out at you as somebody who's like flexing. and when you talk to him for 5 minutes, you're going to realize you don't want to mess with him. And I think that's some of what I'm describing here is Mark doesn't become Mark without Mark making a lot of decisions, micro decisions when no one's looking, to practice not reacting under stress and instead deciding under stress, making committed moves under stress. In my view, those are examples of confidence that's authentic. And it didn't come naturally. It came because he designed his life in such a way that would be the natural fruit that would come from it.
Yeah, confidence isn't like this feeling. I think that's what a lot of us think. It's like, I'm going to feel confident. No, it's like it's a being, and it comes out of, like you're saying, this practice, these habits, these reps. I think that's what we see in Mark.
Well, let's add some nuance to that, because you're right, and you do feel something in the midst of being confident, but the subjective feeling is very different than the affect of what people might project that feeling looks like. So when I'm around a confident person, I can attribute a lot to that person. Like, oh my gosh, they're just like superhuman. Their capacity to show up in a certain way at a certain time. They must feel amazing. You know what actually is going on for them? They're not thinking about their feelings at all. They're too busy focusing on what's in front of them. But it's so compelling when we're around these kinds of people. We go, I want that feeling. That's incredible. And it's funny, you talk to someone who's actually confident in a certain skill set, and what they kind of go, oh, you want this feeling? Show me with your life. Show me with your reps. It's that old example of like the people come in from, golfing, and these really good golfers or whatever, and they're like, oh, I could have gone pro. I could have gone pro. And they see the guy who's actually trying to go pro at the end of the bar with like bloody hands from doing, 72 holes that day. And that guy gets mad. He's like, you've no idea. Or I think of the other example we've talked about on the show before, like that survey that was done after the Olympics.
Totally.
Like where, a quarter of England thought that if they just put 4 years into a thing, they could be an Olympian. They just don't have time to become world class. They don't get it. And we all laugh because it's so outrageous. But what could happen in 4 years? If they can get 4 years worth of confidence. They might not get 20 in 4 years, but they might get 4 years. And 4 years is a lot more than most. And this is where I actually am sympathetic to that survey, because I think that if they remove the expectation around being an Olympian, getting the rewards, having the performance, and they set on themselves the expectation of the work, they will make radical progress. If I want to be an archer or pick the sport, the fencer, or, badminton or ping pong, I actually can get way better at ping pong if I committed wholeheartedly for 4 years. So that's the part where I am okay with it. I think what they underestimate is that it took a lot more than 4 years to get to where people are getting. And that's not bad news. It's actually good news. So because this is a nuanced conversation, I'm hoping that the listeners to today are hearing both a sense of sobriety to what it costs to get the confidence they're craving, and also a sense of hope that, you can totally become confident in ways that will absolutely surprise you, maybe even make you a little embarrassed. This is certainly my experience when I think about earlier seasons in my life where I gestured towards confidence, in contrast with knowing what it actually feels like once you've done the reps and you've embraced the work. And the latter is just so much more gratifying and so much less flashy. And if people are craving that kind of thing, I want to say, like, out loud, it is totally available. It is totally accessible. It's right under your nose. And if it doesn't seem so intuitive, well, maybe stop trying to find it on your own. Maybe try to find it with others that have similar ambition and a willingness to put their bodies where their intentions are.
So if you want to put yourself on the hook, if you want to stop waiting for confidence to show up and actually take an action towards building that, I encourage you, check out the show notes, check out the description. A great first step would be to apply and fill out and answer those questions that we have in our application. It'll help you start to think through these things and, like, what do you really want actually? And how are you going to get there?
The normal website that we point people to is MWOD.io/apply, or just go to itsprobablynotforyou.com and see what you discover. It's probably not for you.com. Men and Women of Discomfort is our membership community, and we are open to everyone. But keep in mind, our tagline is "It's probably not for you." If we're wrong about that, or if you want to find out for yourself, you can find us at MWOD.io.